Three, two, one, take it away. Go for it, Elliot.
All right. Hi, everybody. I really appreciate everyone joining in.
Go for it, Elliot.
Hi,
everybody.
Hold on one sec.
I really appreciate.
And I really appreciate everyone here that's with us on the panel. So this is literally all we're trying to do today. We're not trying to have a big, crazy debate or dialogue or anything. We're just trying to show some people's experiences through life and this very difficult topic that has been race in America, racism in America, and where things are landing and ending up today. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of everybody that's here. So if you don't know me, I'm Elliot. I'm the owner of the Easton Training Centers with Amal Easton in the Colorado area, all over. So real fast, then I have Leister Bowling here. So Leister, say hello.
Hello.
We have Tyrone Glover.
Hey.
Lavelle Simpson.
Hi.
Travis Rivers. Tamesa Glover.
Hi.
And Irving Marshall. Dad, you there?
I'm here.
So just say hello. Yep.
Hello. Sorry.
Okay. So we are just gonna talk. We're just going to talk about some stories where we land, our experiences. I think one of the most important things to do is really attach a story to a person that you actually know in your community. So rather than hear it on the news or, be like, oh yeah, that happened in some place I've never been, to some people I've never been with. So we are going to really attach some stories, and we are going to start with Tamesa. Tamesa is from originally the segregated South. Yes, Tamesa?
Yes.
And went through desegregation, the civil rights movement, went to a historical Black college, met her husband, had Tyrone, who's, we introduced Tyrone earlier, that's her son. And has had a very successful career as a lawyer. And I'm just going to let you take it away, and you can just tell your story so that people can hear what it's like, maybe, and then that will attach to Tyrone being raised by someone who's experienced this. So go ahead.
And you're absolutely right. I grew up in Rock Hill, South Carolina. We were, desegregation started much earlier than it really happened in our town. Our school board did not desegregate schools until they were forced to by the courts. And so the first year that I was involved, we had something called freedom of choice. So I had gone to a segregated Black elementary school until the 8th grade. And then when I went to high school as a 9th grader, my parents made the choice for me to go to the predominantly white high school instead of the Black high school in my community. I wasn't happy about that. I think most kids probably don't have this martyr complex. They just want to be with their friends and have fun. So I was having to leave my friends who were all going to the Black high school. And my parents felt, this was an opportunity that if it were offered and nobody went, it just would not advance the cause. So 9th grade through 12th grade, I was in a predominantly white school. And what happened after, I believe it was 1 or 2 years of this freedom of choice option, they decided to just close all of the Black schools. And so that's when things really changed, because those 2 years before we had numbers, we were just isolated. We were picked on, we were, just singled out. We really had no refuge because the teachers didn't want us there and the students didn't want us there. So enduring that for the 2 years, I think really probably shaped a lot of who I am. Those last 2 years when we had more Black students, it moved from me being the only Black person in all of my classes to at least having, one or two or, 3 or 4 Black students in my classes. By that time, we had been denied the right to participate in sports or extracurricular activities. So our destiny was already kind of, developed by the time we got to be seniors. I had really had it with that situation. A lot of the white colleges were integrating. A lot of my cousins went to schools like Harvard and Yale, but I chose to go to a historically Black college, mainly because I was tired of being the only Black student. So that, maybe brings me up to, my adult years. I got married shortly after graduating from Hampton University and had Ty maybe 7 or 8 years after I graduated. And he's lived a very different life. I grew up in a segregated neighborhood, segregated schools, and Ty grew up very, very differently than how I grew up.
So maybe let's have Tyrone jump in here. If you want to unmute, Tyrone, you're on mute. So obviously, I think one of the things that we want to be kind of talking about and touching on is sometimes we can make that seem so long ago, right? Like you hear this theme a lot right now of, oh, that's the past. We're over that, right? But how can we be over that when this is the person who raised you, right? Like, like this is the experience that she had, and she I guess I talked to a friend, Tim Kennedy, the other day, and he was talking about his military experience. He's like, look, I can't look through the world through any other lens, right? So how could your mom look through the world through any other lens than, right, wrong, indifferent, doesn't matter, through the lens she's got. So how did that touch your life, Tyrone? What was that like?
So my dad was in the Army as a physician. And so my first memories, right? I don't remember, like most of us, like the first 4 years of your life, but like my first memories and when I was really, present and aware, I would say were when we were stationed overseas in Germany, right? And Mom, I'd be interested in knowing sort of what was it like there, sort of as a Black family versus when we moved back? Because from my perception, we were there, we were Americans in a foreign land, we had the military and, that sort of as our community. But I didn't think about, race as much when I was there as when we moved back stateside. Like I remember having a conversation with one of our little neighbors. We were going through like the crowns in the crown box, and she was like, I'm peachy color and you're brown color. And that's sort of the extent of what I remember. But I remember when we moved back stateside, because my brother was born over there, issues of race and sort of Black and white were much more pronounced when we went back to Rock Hill, or we went back to Smithville, Virginia, where my dad was from, just sort of seeing and feeling that segregation. And so I think that is really influenced the way that I've grown up, because I didn't necessarily, my early years of my life were spent in a foreign country. So I've always sort of looked at what's going on in the US and all of this sort of black and white and segregation and racism. It's sort of like, well, what is going on here? It's just I've never wanted to accept it. But yeah, I didn't grow up in segregated communities, but there is a sort of natural segregation that I think happens, in especially our education system and our neighborhoods, right? Because of just years of systematic racism. So I feel like most of especially once we got out of the military, a lot of our neighborhoods, though they weren't technically segregated, were majority white. A lot of the schools were majority white. And, over the years, my mom has had to sort of step up and reacquaint herself with her activist roots in order to give, Black folks and people of color, and especially students, voices in those arenas. And so, that's just, I guess, a little bit of sort of my background and my take on it.
Tyrone, you and I did a podcast this week that's hopefully going to air next week.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought you did a really good job of explaining Black Lives Matter. So, and what that is, right? Like, and how, and not the political organization, right? Not the, okay, who you're going to give money to go do politics, right? But just the idea of Black Lives Matter. I thought you went through that really well. So let's jump through. I would like for you to try to explain that, like the difference between Black lives and all lives. And then, or like, I don't know, not the difference, the similarity, right? Because
it's the same thing.
Same thing, right?
The same thing.
So go ahead.
All lives is this retort to when people say Black Lives Matter, right? It's a way to sort of chop that down and sort of try to discount it. There's a proposition, and it's a very simple proposition in this country. All men are created equal, even though we're referenced as 3/5 of a person in our Constitution. The Constitution says we are all created equal. And in order for everyone to be equal in this country and in this society, in this world, subjugated and marginalized populations need to matter, right? And we need to recognize that there are inequities, right? That the lives and the way that people are living and the poverty that they're living in, the way they interact with our institutions is in such a way that they do not matter. And so we need to yell it out and say, you know what, Black lives matter, right? And until Black lives matter, all lives don't matter. So the focus is on making sure that we can, continue the hard work of, my mother, of your father, of the generations before us, and continue to fight forward so that one day Black lives can matter. And then we get closer to all lives mattering, because it's not like once Black lives matter, all lives suddenly matter, right? There are other subjugated populations in our country. And I think we just need to always be trying to pull people up so that we're all on the same plane eventually. And it's just, I think it's work that we're never not going to be doing.
Yeah, great point. Let's jump into my dad. Hi, Dad. Hold on, let's take you off mute. Jordan, can you want to take him off mute? Hold on, Dad.
Okay.
All right. Yep, you're good. How are you, Dad?
Well, I'm fine. And thanks for the opportunity to be able to speak with folks, and nice to meet everyone.
Yeah. So I'll introduce you a little bit. You are an African-American male who grew up very poor, probably ridiculously poor. And you ended up marrying a white woman, a white Jewish woman. And you had me, you're right. And you had my sister, you had some others,
Yes, we did.
So, and we didn't live in the nicest place for us. We didn't grow up in the nicest place for any of us, right? With mommy being Jewish. I said mommy again, guys. Sorry. You guys are gonna have to deal with this when we talk about the other parent that is not there. We say mommy and daddy for some reason, and I don't know. It's just what we do in my family. So it's not like mommy was normal. It was not a segregated group. So what was that? What was your experience like? Childhood, being poor, difficult childhood, right? Like you were the oldest who had to basically raise your siblings. And then moving on, making yourself happen, trying to create a better life for me and my sister and that. So go ahead, Dad.
Well, as my son said, my life wasn't necessarily, a life that had a whole lot to it except for family. Money was a little bit tight. I grew up in a town in southern New Jersey that was predominantly white, accepting of me because we lived on the right side of the tracks. There was the other side of the tracks where more Black people lived than white folks. But my family was on the right side of the tracks, if you know how that saying goes. And we were kind of accepted, the Marshalls, because we behaved correctly, were responsible, that kind of a thing. In terms of schooling, my parents stressed schooling. My dad was a worker. My mom had some degree of college. She was a nurse. And they stressed the importance of their children, my other brother and my two sisters, getting an education and moving forward. Well, that experience in my little town of Egg Harbor City, New Jersey was interesting. I was accepted because I was probably, when I graduated from 8th grade, 8th grade graduations, I was the top student in that class. There were one or two other students, but at the awards ceremony at that time, I won a lot of the little American Legion Awards and those kind of little medallions. And my life had been okay. Remembering some of my initial experiences with racism during that time, I remember the first time that I was called the N-word by a friend whom I thought and respected a lot. We later dealt with it in life and discussed that incident, and we remained friends for a time. Throughout high school, I didn't achieve as well as I had in grade school in the little community that I came from, but I graduated from high school in a class of about 380 students. I think it was 119 or 120. So I was in the top third of the class. During high school, I participated in a lot of athletics and some, extracurricular activities, and excelled enough to be accepted to college and go to college. In terms of the issues of race in my high school, as long as, again, you behaved right, you excelled, you were accepted to a point. You were accepted in the academic experience and that school experience, but not in the social experience. I never got asked to go to any of the parties that I knew were happening or get-togethers at people's homes. And just to go back to the grade school experience too, one thing that has stuck in my mind forever since I was a young person was when my parents tried to get me involved in the Boy Scouts of America. And we were denied because we were told there had to be a black den mother in order for me to be accepted, and there were no black den mothers. So I've always kind of held this kind of resentment toward the Boy Scouts of America from my experience. Jumping back to high school, I graduated from high school, moved on, went to a little school out in Southern Indiana for about a year. I had a very, very strong experience with racism one day, walking back from the shower to my dorm room, and there were straight pins and a sign posted on my dorm door that said, "N, go back to where you belong." And it was a big thing to me at that time because I had never experienced that kind of hatred directly. And I remember some of my friends becoming incensed, but it wasn't the same kind of feeling that I had being the victim and the target of that kind of racism. I left that school, went back to my hometown, went through junior college and college back in New Jersey, graduated and became a teacher. And I selected the community and was selected by a community to teach in that was very poor and, and needed Black role models. So I kind of accepted that, being a young 23-year-old person, and tried to be that type of person. There were experiences with race, I remember, and racism. The school that I was a teacher in was in Southwest New Jersey in a community called Bridgeton, New Jersey. And there were a series of school protests and riots and things of that nature at that time, just because of some of the discrimination that existed in that community. One afternoon, I had to be escorted out of town by some of my colleagues because the local KKK was out to target black folks because of the riots in the school. So I remember being escorted by my friends in my curriculum department out of town safely until I got outside the boundaries of those towns so I could get home. A memorable experience, as well as the recruitment papers that were put in teachers' mailboxes by the KKK. Somehow they snuck into the building to try to recruit teachers to be members of the KKK.
Dad, I wasn't alive at this point, right? No.
No, you weren't alive. Okay. Then your mom and I met your mom. Your mom and I got married, and everything was hunky dory. No, it wasn't. We had our, initial, issues with being accepted, by family, those kinds of things. That went on for a while, and we had children. We had a very comfortable community around us of friends who supported us as an interracial couple. It was difficult at times, sometimes for other people to accept us, but we kind of persevered through that because my wife and I had each other and we counted on each other's strength. We had children, Elliot being the firstborn and then his sister Ita. Their life was different than ours, and we tried to provide a community and comfort and support for them. And, we didn't necessarily know what kind of things they were facing individually, especially in terms of that life that Elliot lived when he grew up in Franklin Township, he and his sister. We didn't know the depth of how much they were shut out by some of their so-called friends and how that community impacted their lives until a little bit later. Were we blind? I don't think we were blind. I think we were consumed with being good parents, going to work, being responsible, and those kinds of things.
I'll jump in on you, Dad, there. Yeah. So, were you blind? I wouldn't say that you were blind.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I don't know how to say it. It was, we fit in nowhere. Mm-mm. Like my sister and I, Ita and I, no, we didn't have, because we weren't anything, right? Mm-hmm. We weren't black. We weren't white. We weren't Jewish. We weren't Christian. We were just this other thing, so we were all the way other. And if I'm going to go back on what Tyrone did of noticing the first time that I know that it was pointed out to me that I was other was first grade. I had a first grade teacher, and we were talking about what we were, and I was like, oh, I'm black and white. I was like, my daddy's black and my mommy's white. And this teacher said that that's not allowed. And I can remember going, what do you mean it's not allowed? How are you going to tell me my dad's not black and my mom's not white? And she's like, nope, not allowed, not okay. And I was like, well, my daddy's Christian and my mommy's Jewish too. And then she went like off the deep end, wow. I don't think that teacher taught again.
Nope.
I think that was her last day.
I can't remember the incident exactly, but I do think that was her last day.
I think that was her last day. So that was the first time. And then I never noticed it. I didn't even know what she was talking about, So, and then came the move for us. And the move is when we noticed it.
Right,
Franklin Township, right? We pulled up to our house one day. You were doing all the work. My dad built the house basically with the contractor, did a lot of work, physical. And we pulled up to do some work. My sister and I think my sister and I think my mom was definitely there too. My sister and I were going to play, and my parents were going to do some work like on the, we were going to play on the sand dunes. And it was, Nigers go home because they couldn't spell the word right. Only one G, and then swastikas painted all over our house. So that's when I was like, okay, what's this? What's this? And this was, that was the rest of our lives, right? That was the rest of my childhood is stuff like that, and nobody would ever blatantly call us anything, but for some context, I think everyone's probably seen the video of the dudes, the white guys in South Jersey kneeling on the one brother kneeling on the other brother's neck, with the flags in the background and making fun of the George Floyd situation. Well, not to curse, but I went to high school with those motherfuckers, and that's how I drove to school. That was my way to school every single day. Right. So we drove right by that house, right where they were. So this was just the experience, and I get it. Those guys probably never called me the N-word, or they've never, but it's this quiet, it's this quiet, that this complacency where people get to hide in the racism, I would say, sometimes, which is what we really have to try to bring to light right now. Right. Like, I think when Tyrone, you and I were talking about this for a second, silence isn't an option anymore. Right. I think you're muted, Tyrone.
Yeah, silence is violence. And those people may have liked you as an individual, but, would be quick to condemn an entire group.
Yeah.
Which is
So,
a problem.
so we're going to jump from the silence is violent thing, because I want to go to Leister here, because Leister and I both own businesses in town, Leister, you don't have to do this, you don't, there's nothing in it for you, right? Like, other than the right thing, right? Other than the right thing. So go ahead, Leister, go talk about, like, so you like brought me to tears the other week, a little bit, I have to say, when you were explaining the story where you were like sitting down with your son, little Leister, so go ahead. You're muted, Leister. Jordan, help him out. There we go. Up, you're muted again. Do it again. Hey, all right, go ahead, Leister.
All right. Well, first of all, I mean, you said I don't have to be here. I feel like I do. This is a very sensitive subject to a lot of people. And I've got a lot of friends that are Black, and not only friends, but like one of my biggest mentors in college wrestling is a Black guy, Brahmin. We've had these talks since I met him 20 years ago. We went and do camps together. We've been to a lot of towns where I fit in just fine, and it's pretty clear that he doesn't, and a lot of those towns we go to are very similar to the town that I grew up in, Lyons, Colorado. I had 48 kids in my class. So not a lot of diversity in Lyons, Colorado, and I truly didn't experience diversity until I went to college. And that's one of the things I love about sport is any sport, really. For me, it's wrestling. When I got to college, my roommates were Black. My two best friends are Mexican. And that was who I hung out with. I've got more minority friends from college than I do, white people. And that's definitely different from the town I grew up in, and I think being around those guys and, I listened to a podcast the other day with some wrestling coaches talking about, racism in wrestling, because it's, this blue collar white guy sport that, I feel like there's always been racism. I've seen it with referees. We saw it with the kid with dreadlocks last year that the ref made him cut his dreadlocks off on the mat, There's a lot of that goes on. But the white guy that was on the podcast was talking about how, well, I've never had these talks before. I've got a lot of Black friends. I've never had these talks, and I don't know how that's possible. I've had these talks with every one of my Black friends about what they've experienced and where I'm from. And I've always asked questions about why. And I feel like those private talks need to be more public, because I grew up in Lyons, Colorado, real close to Boulder. I don't feel like I grew up in like a racist town. There's definitely some good old boys up there that, you could probably guess what their beliefs are, but it wasn't like open racism. You didn't hear about any of the stuff that I'm hearing, today that you guys went through. But I think that the lack of diversity, there wasn't one Black person in town, it's easy for that group of people that I grew up with in my hometown to hear about the stuff that's going on and say, God, what are they so mad about? This happened so long ago, but I think that it's stuff that people still experience. I know it's stuff that people still experience every day. And, just because it's not happening in our hometown, there's still racist jokes that happen, that all of us are guilty of. I've heard them, I've laughed at them, I've probably told them throughout the years. You hear about this stuff and it's like, well, I'm not racist, it's just a joke, well, at the same time, if I'm not going to tell that joke to, Elliot or Brahmin or LaVille or Tyrone, any of you guys, then it's not funny, so that's the talk that I pulled my son aside. I live in rural Colorado. I don't know that there's many Black people, if at all, that go to my son's middle school. And so I pulled him aside and just talk to them about it. Like, this isn't something that's okay. Just because we don't live in what you're seeing on the news doesn't mean that it's not happening, and it doesn't mean that it's something that we can't, try to help people understand. And I don't know, we talked about this, Elliot. I don't know what the right thing is to do. How can you help? There's not a lot that you can just go out and directly do that's going to help the situation or help people open their minds. But I think these talks, they're great, and they do help. And the one thing that I think isn't talked about enough right now is not just racism. I think most people, whether they've, laughed at those jokes or not, they're going to say, well, I'm not racist. I've got a black friend. He comes to my barbecues and hangs out, and he was at my house last week or whatever. But it's cultural understanding, and I don't know if that's the right word. I'm not always the best speaker, but
my dad nodded his head. That you must have got. I think my dad and Tyrone's mom both nodded their heads. So that means you must have hit it okay.
That group of athletes that I hung out with, all you guys and Elliot and Brahman and my roommates, we all wrestled together, or I coached LaVille, and I'm good with all these guys. That doesn't mean that, like, oh, well, look at these guys. They don't look the same. They're not athletes or jocks or college educated or a lawyer, and so it's not the same type of friends that I have, so I'm not so sure about these guys are okay, but these guys aren't okay. So I think, the biggest thing that I want to talk about more and talk about with my kids is just cultural understanding. You might see somebody that's dressed completely different, talks completely different, and it just doesn't mean they think completely different, so I don't know.
Doesn't mean they're not okay, right?
Right. Doesn't mean they're not okay. Yep.
Right. Doesn't mean they're not okay. Go ahead, Dad. You're on mute.
Jordan. Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, I think Lisa hit on a good point. The conversation is real important. And that's something that I've continued to try to stress throughout my personal life as well as my professional career with people, to continue the conversation. And at times that conversation can be very uncomfortable. But we need to keep that going. We need to outline what our differences are and also what our similarities are. Our commonality is important. It's important to understand, in my life's experiences, the different cultural nuances that make each one of us up. But I think the thing is, though, to provide that information, because most people don't know unless they engage with you, unless they have that conversation, unless they sit down right across from you or on the phone, more so than a Facebook post or a text message. That conversation directly, I think, is a key factor in getting to know people and exposing people to who you are. Professionally, I always tried to let people know who I was and what my worth and value was as a person and as a man. And I think we all need to have that conversation to let people know what our worth and our value is, and that our humanness is very similar. But to be mute and, is not acceptable anymore. The time for neutrality is over. You're either part of the problem or part of the solution to the problem. So said Eldridge Cleaver.
Yeah, good points, Dad. Let's jump on to Lavelle, because I think Lavelle's got a story. We always hear these terrible stories of someone who was put away. Ooh, where'd you go, Lavelle?
Am I
There
not
you go.
muted anymore?
Yep. Nope. Well, you're not muted anymore, but your picture went away.
All right, my bad.
You have the story, an African American male in your family that you were close to that went to jail for something he didn't do. Correct?
I have a lot of stories if you want to go, like where I grew up.
Dad, can you mute again? Or Jordan, can you mute my dad? So go ahead.
Go in order for you.
You can go in order. Okay.
Yeah, I can go in order for you. My parents, my dad was in the military. My dad's the youngest of 12. He's originally from the outside of Philadelphia. My mom's the youngest of 5. She's originally from Laramie, Wyoming. When my parents separated in 93 or 94, we ended up going back to Wyoming with my mom's side of the family. The first time I was called the N-word was either 4 or 5 years old when I let go of the grocery cart in Walmart and I got separated from my mom. I got lost. I just remember crying on the floor, and some lady came up and, she was like, "Hey, are you lost?" Yeah. And her husband walked up and he said, "Don't worry about it. The little lost, he'll be found." And they just bounced out. And I remember asking my mom, I remember finally store worker finds me, "Stacy Simpson, can you please come and find, your son that's at customer service?" And then I remember asking my mom what that word meant. And she told me from that day on, if anyone ever were to call me that word, I was to knock the hell out of them. So you fast forward maybe 97, 98, all of a sudden an uncle is accused of murdering a young girl in Wyoming, and just like that, he's gone. I watch a black man just get 20 years just taken from his life, and the next thing you know, we're going to visit him. So then there's a conditioning process that comes with that too, because now you're going in there and you're taking IDs for you're taking pictures for your ID. Now you're taking fingerprints for yourself. But in the same time, you're also seeing someone that and that you love, and they're kind of like in a weird situation. So as a young kid, you're just like, is this where am I going to end up here too? Because he looks okay. Like, we come and we visit him once a month. We get snacks out of the vending machine. We talk. We watch TV. He writes us letters. Is this what's going to come for me too eventually? Like, one day, is this what's going to happen? Because I already know how it sounds when these doors close. I already know what it's like. Yeah. So then there was that. I just remember, visiting my uncle throughout certain years, and then
Can I ask you a question?
elementary school.
How'd that make you feel? Like, how did that make you, like, the system that we talk about, right? Like, because your uncle didn't do it, right?
No, my uncle was in a whole nother state. My uncle's in Texas.
Your uncle was in Texas,
I was
right?
in Texas, and then the next thing you know, he gets a call from the sheriff's department asking him, "Hey, can you come to down the station and talk to us?" And the next thing you know, he's being tried for murder, and they're trying to give him the death penalty.
So sometimes a common narrative you hear is, man, just don't resist the arrest. Like,
Yeah.
just listen to what they say. And if you don't, well, your uncle didn't resist the arrest, and look where he ended up.
Yeah, 19 years, man.
19 years.
19 years.
So that's tough.
Yeah, and that's gone. And then you got to remember, that's the stigma and the dark cloud that hangs over your family's head, because there's only maybe 3-4 other African American families in that community. So they already know who you're related to. So then you got to remember, there's times you're walking into grocery stores, you're being followed around by grocery stores. Employees are telling you to empty out your pockets. Then you're going to school. Then you're finding out some of these same school teachers were teaching your uncles and your mom when they were kids. And then you're also starting to find out how they're treating you different. Like, there's this one lady, her name was Liz, man, and she was a monitor at my elementary school. And she tortured me all the way from first grade till I left elementary school. For any excuse my language, for any reason, I almost cursed, for any reason that she felt that it was necessary. There could be times, and Wyoming gets cold, man. Wyoming gets cold during the winters, man. It can get below 30 there. And, they're still sending us out there to play on the playgrounds. And there could be times where all of us would be walking out, and she would literally, like, I had maybe taken 2 steps out of the classroom, and she would look at me and she's like, "Lavelle, you're going to go stand on the wall today, and you're not going to play with any of your friends during recess. It's blowing, it's freezing, it's snowing, it's cold. I ain't done nothing to this woman, yet she's going to make me." She tortured me for it's like 6 years, man. She tortured me. And then you got to deal with all the other stuff that comes from the teachers. Certain teachers are treating you different. Then junior high comes and they want to start calling you a thug. They want to start calling you a gangbanger. Then the next thing you know, you have the youth resource officers labeling you as a gangbanger. They're wanting to go through your locker. You have a principal picking on you. You have substitute teachers that are referring to you as blue gums, which they call chimpanzees. You have stuff like that going on. Then you have, finally, you got your peers that are nutting up and they're dropping the N-word in front of the whole classroom, and the teacher's looking at you and telling you it's nothing but a word. Don't do nothing. Like it means nothing. Well, if you're not going to do something, I'm going to do something, because I have to come here. Like, I have to come here. And if I let such and such keep going on with this, which it did happen, like it happened. I fought a lot growing up. Like I salted what? I got tired of this kid calling me the N-word. He did it to me. He did it to my cousins. He did it to other couple black kids. I finally got tired of it, and I smoked him in the face with the lunch tray in the middle of the lunchroom. Let everyone see it happen, That's how that's how I caught my first charge.
Let's stop right there for a sec. Let's stop, Tyrone. Come back on, because you're a big proponent of this, right? Like, that's how Lavelle caught his first charge,
Yep.
right? Getting called the N-word in school, arrested,
Yep.
right? And I know you talk a lot about this school to prison pipeline, right? So go ahead.
School to prison pipeline.
Yeah. So go ahead, explain that a little bit, Tyrone. Just so everyone knows, Tyrone's a lawyer, and this is what he does for a living. So go ahead, have at it.
Yeah, and in Denver Public Schools, we just ended our contract with the Denver police, right? Because when you have police in schools, when you have these school resource officers, what you find is that they're arresting Black kids at a much more disproportionate rate than their white counterparts, right? Two white kids get in a fight, right? They sit them down. There's some conflict, resolution stuff, call their parents probably know each other, but when, a Black kid does like what Lavelle did, right? They end up in juvenile hall or juvenile detention, and then there's their introduction to the system, right? And now their parents, who may have been already struggling to take them back and forth and provide resources for them, just getting them to school in the morning, are now having to go to court date after court date after court date, right? And now you have the government in your life. And then that's when we talk about that revolving door of the criminal justice system. And so this sort of criminalization of Black young people in our schools is, it's a consequence of this sort of this institutional racism. I remember when we were in school, there was this group called the Good Old Boys, right? And the second me and my crew of probably 9 Black kids, we all went to the same junior high, ended up, in high school, the Good Old Boys were picking on us, and we didn't back down, right? And we would fight them all. And what would happen? They would stay, and one of my friends would get expelled, right? So then our little crew of 9 is suddenly 3. Luckily, then this is sort of how my mom got involved in education politics, organized with a group of parents to, what was it called, Mom? Concerned parents of African-American children, and stepped up and started advocating, to the board and to the superintendent and to the principals about what was happening. But, and it had a bit of a dent, but, probably 2/3 of us were already expelled by the time, people start stepping in. So that's what that is. It's like this criminalization. There's a lot of racial theories. Black people aren't smart, or that sort of have fallen by the wayside. But the one that continues to prevail is this sort of Black people have this natural propensity towards criminality, right? And that starts at the earliest age with having police arrest and incarcerate Black people when they're in high school or junior high or even elementary school.
But you also even have it to where they're diagnosing young African-American boys with behavioral issues at young ages. They're holding young Black boys back in preschool and kindergarten programs, saying that they have ADHD, they have anger issues, they have social issues. How do I know that? They wanted to blame it and say it was on my birthday. I was the oldest goddamn kindergartner. Excuse my French, I didn't mean to say that, but I was the oldest kindergartner. But yeah, I have people that are in there that are younger than me, birthdays around the same time as mine. So then it kind of makes you wonder, was I a part of that? Was I being diagnosed with, because once again, they did try to diagnose me with behavioral issues. They tried to get me, to sit there and say that I had ADHD, I had anger problems. part of the probation that I was on for that first charge is I actually had to talk to a counselor. I had to talk to someone about anger, and I had to talk to someone to see if I could possibly want to grow up and kill people. But then you also have, I would go to school, then you have teachers making sly comments, telling you that you'll be lucky if you make it out here. You'll be lucky if you graduate. You'll be lucky if you're not dead. You'll be lucky if you're not in prison. You also have that. 15, I was falsely accused of raping a white girl at the back of a bus because her dad found out she was kissing a black boy. So once again, you have that whole, is this my turn? Is this how this is going to go down? Because I just watched a couple of my older cousins just drop out of high school because they just fell to the pressure. Like they finally gave into the pressure.
Let's pause for a sec. One
yeah.
sec, Lavelle. Hold on one sec. Tamesa wanted to jump in. Go ahead, Tamesa.
Unmute yourself, Mom.
I think he's, and all of you have expressed, I think, how pervasive racism is, especially our Black young men are labeled at a very early age. When Ty, was a rambunctious kid, and he didn't always understand why he couldn't do something. And it seemed that the principal or the teachers were always calling me. Once I went in and they were upset that all the Black kids were sitting at lunch together. And my question was, well, all the white kids sit at lunch together. So what is the problem? They wanted, to scatter them around and have one Black kid at every table. And all of these kind of things, I think, just make Black young men angry. It's very hurtful when you do things like that. And when you have no one to really stand up and say, this is wrong. So I think it's, even in some of the honors classes, I would go in and look at the honors classes, no Black students at all. And what they had were all of these barriers to get into the class. A teacher recommendation, what does that have to do with learning? It just, in every little area that you want to advance, it seems that there were barriers to you getting there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tamesa, I can, when you're talking about the, you get angry eventually, like Lavelle got angry. I don't know if you remember this, Dad, but I remember this. You got pulled over once, and I learned, look, I've only gotten pulled over outside of myself with you. Like mommy never got pulled over, so you were the only one that got pulled over. So I learned how to deal with the police through you, and you were always really good, because you got pulled over a lot. I thought you sped more than Mom when I was a little kid, but we probably know that that's not the case. But one time, Dad, you weren't so good. You got a little angry, and I think after you got angry, you got scared. But I can remember feeling it because you were like, oh shit, my kid's in the car. Right? Like, because, he said he was just checking, and that's what he said. And you looked at him and said, what are you checking for? What's there to check? And that could be it. You were having a bad day, probably, right? With what Tamesa was saying, right? You just have enough sometimes, and you were having a bad day. I don't know if you remember it or not. And then I could feel this fear on you because like it could have gone so bad for not just you, right? Because it could have been it for me too, maybe, right? And then when fear takes over, you got it back together. You got it back together really quickly, but that could have gone ugly for both of us. You're muted, Dad. Hold on, Dad.
There we go.
There we go.
And I might not remember that specific incident, but again, the need to be tactful that we have to remember in any circumstance, especially as a black man in America? Yeah. And more than likely in thinking about what you just said, yeah, I became very concerned because definitely it could have gone left real fast. How that person could have perceived me as being uppity, as being aggressive, the kind of language that, unfortunately, in America, as an African American, that language is directed at you or thought about you a lot. Going back to what Lavelle was talking about in terms of his experiences in schools, that was my business. And to try to deal with a culture that automatically assumed that some people were worth less, automatically, as soon as they walked in the door, was kind of difficult. And trying to help change a culture, who, in some cases, culture of teachers, educators, who didn't give a person a chance just because at first glance, they made an assumption that the person was less intelligent, less socially adequate, but just being less was difficult. And in understanding what Lavelle went through, that happened every day in schools that I dealt with. And we had to fight against that. Those of us who were concerned after a community and a mission that we all kind of accepted was understood, and people were willing to cross the line and help develop some understanding for those kids who were the subject of that kind of racism.
For sure. All right, Trav, you're the only one, man. You're the last on the bus here. I know you and I have talked a lot about your dealings with, especially police, right? You come Rochester, New York, right? Upstate New York.
Yeah.
Not New York City, right? Not a big town. So, go ahead. Let's talk about your experience.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of grew up all over the place. So, I was born in the inner city, Rochester, New York. I was adopted at a young age. I was born to a single mother. So adopted. My dad's side of the family, they actually moved to Rochester, like most Black families that live in Rochester, fleeing like racial terror from the South. So they came from Tennessee, and obviously, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was a difficult time for them to be there. So they relocated out to the city, up to Rochester. So lived in the city as a kid, and then my dad's been a lifelong educator. So like he's always stressed like the importance of a good education. So and when you look at Rochester, it's super segregated. All of the Black people live inside the city, and then all the white people live outside of the city. And then if you look at the institutions in both areas, there's a huge contrast. You go to the inner cities, and they don't have heat in a lot of the classrooms. They have police in the classrooms. They have cockroaches. They have rats. So it's not the same opportunity. So when I was a kid, my dad moved us to Wayne County, which is like about a half hour outside of Rochester. And it's known in upstate New York that Wayne County is super racist. So I grew up in a small town, up until 8th grade. And kind of like everybody else, like racism was the most pervasive aspect of my life. It was like 3rd grade, the first time I got called the N-word. And it was, it was something I'll never forget because it was a friend that called me that, and it was a friend that I liked. And I was confused. I'm like, so that set the tone immediately as a kid, that people that you like can still dislike aspects of you because of what you look like and who you are. And honestly, it's one of those things that early on that put a distrust in me. I immediately kind of felt like you can't trust anybody. You're my friend, but you're still attempting to hurt me. And then a couple weeks later, also in 3rd grade, got in my first fist fight. It was a 6th grader who lived down the street. We rode separate buses. He had heard, through the grapevine that a Black kid lived at the end of the street. So he told a friend to tell me that after school, he was going to come jump me. So after school, I sat on my porch and I waited for him, and we fought. And that was, kind of the first time I really realized that like people will try to hurt me because I'm different, and it was one of those things that changes you. You forever are resentful, of just knowing that that's an aspect.
So what you're saying is you can't just get over that.
No, it's I don't think I'll ever not be angry and resentful, like, and that's honestly the main reason I started training martial arts, because I was angry all day, every day. And I'm like, if I don't have some type of outlet, I'm gonna go to jail. It's 120% chance, especially at that point in time in my life. I was tripping, I was doing too much. I was partying a lot. I'm hanging out with people that are making poor choices, I'm continuously getting pulled over. So I'm like, if I don't have something else that I can do, I'm going to jail. So that's really what got me to martial arts. I was just always so angry. And it was kind of the same, stories as everybody else, growing up in that racist environment is I was immediately labeled the criminal and the angry kid. And I spent years fighting kids in my class. It was continuous. I was fighting on the playground every day. I was fighting in the playground after school every day. People would come to my neighborhood to fight me. And then eventually, I'm in like 4th grade, and like that's when, we kind of formed this like, ragtag group of all the brown kids that lived in the town and all the other misfits that lived in the town, and we just hung out together. But even with that, it was continuously like other parents in the neighborhood wouldn't let their kids play with us. They called the cops on us a lot. So like we would skateboard and they would call the cops on us all the time. So, I was in like 4th or 5th grade was like the first time that I had to start running from the police, and I was taught early on that police aren't there to help people that look like you. They're there essentially to make sure you're aligned. You're doing the right things. So
you were taught to run from the police.
I was taught to treat them respectfully. Yes, sir. No, sir. But I mean, especially when you're a kid and you've heard stories from your dad and your uncles and your other friends of people getting beat up by the police or getting arrested by the police, or you watch documentaries of what prisons are like. You're like, I don't want any part of that. So they would come around.
You run.
You run. Yeah. I'm not sticking around.
You run.
I mean, like I'm leaving the scene immediately.
Because Lavelle, you experienced it, right? With your own life and your own family. Trav, you felt it and saw it, right? Where you can't hang out for this.
Yeah.
Right. So
they're not showing up to protect you.
Yeah.
they're there because somebody else in the neighborhood was uncomfortable with what we were doing. Whether it was like, we were skateboarding in the wrong part of town, or like we made a ramp and they thought, these are the excuses, but like we made a ramp and they thought it was dangerous. So they called the police, like, small things like that.
They called the police, not your parents.
No, not my parents. Yeah.
Right. Not their parents. Yeah. The police.
Yeah. And so we even had another dad in the neighborhood at one point in time threatened to hang us from a tree, it was like to the point where my dad actually went across the street. He had a civil conversation, I think, with him. And then like after that, we were cool. But, it was one of the things like he's telling his son that, and then his son is walking around the neighborhood telling me that, so in addition to the police and to teachers that aren't treating me right, I have to watch out for this man who lives across the street from me, so I'm like, I'm continuously on alert from like, who's coming after me today? What's going on? So we lived in that town until
that gets tiresome, right?
It gets old. It gets old very fast. Like you get used to being angry all the time. And for me growing up, one of the greatest skills that I had to learn was to just control your emotions. Because there's been a million situations where I'm like, you're just so angry. I got it, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So like getting called the N-word once, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. But like, then I get called it 30 more times. And you're like, how many times can I take it before I lose it? So that kind of like sets the stage as a kid. Moved to the suburbs after that. It was better, but it was still like, still dealing with a lot of the same stuff, still dealing with a lot of, I didn't remember until I actually talked to my dad last night, but there were a lot of times where like, even when we moved to the suburbs, he would actually have to have conferences with my teachers because like they wouldn't allow me to like make up assignments from when I was out sick from school, or they'd sit me in the corner of the classroom with special ed kids, even though I was in some of the honors classes. and even going back to the elementary school, he was continuously meeting with my teachers. Like in 4th grade, I actually had to be switched out of a teacher's classroom because of how poorly she treated me. She put me in the corner. She made me redo assignments continuously. She yelled at me all the time. It was like one of those things, like if she found something wrong that I was doing, she was going to scream at me in front of the whole class. And so it eventually got to the point after meeting after meeting after meeting, my dad was like, you have to get him out of this class. So it was like my dad was constantly fighting those battles, eventually like went off to college. I decided to like move back into the city. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. But then that brings, a whole nother set of issues. The police were continually harassing us. Like I've been sitting there watching a police officer threaten to kill my friend for no reason. I've seen police officers beat people up mercilessly for no reason. I've had police officers pepper spray me for no reason. I've had police officers knock my friend's teeth out for no reason, and it's, maybe it's not like that now, but once upon a time, it's like, it's so regular that like, you don't even think that you should tell somebody that you saw, X thing happening.
So, man, I think we've all told our stories, I think that's been addressed. I guess where I'll end is with what Leister said. When I said he didn't have to, but he was like, no, I have to, I have to start speaking up. Go ahead, Leister, if you want to. Hold on. Can't hear you. You're muted still. Bottom. Jordan, help him out.
Got it.
There we go.
Just figured that out. I'm as bad as your dad with this. So one thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about that I completely missed that I think is super important is, people like me that didn't grow up with any diversity, when you get on the news or you listen to an interview and you hear something like the term white privilege always, rubs people wrong that aren't diverse. It does, because it feels, for some reason, that word feels like you're grouping me in with all these racists, and I'm not. Like, I don't know why it puts people on the defensive, so I put a post on Facebook. I very rarely post anything, even remotely political or anything like this. But when I talked to Elliot and I'd been talking to Brahman, I felt like I need to put something out there. When I really think about the term white privilege, I'm white. Okay. So all the stories that you guys are telling, I never experienced, I hate the word, like, privilege makes you feel entitled, I think. So you hear that word and sometimes it's like, well, I had my problems, I had my struggles, I earned my stuff. And I think that the people that feel offended by it need to really really just reevaluate the whole word and the term and say, let's change it to lucky, right? So every one of us on the screen, we're all privileged to be an American, even with your guys' struggles. Like, America, in my opinion, is the greatest country in the world. I've been to a lot of them, we definitely have a lot of problems, and you guys are a testament to that with all the stories you've told. We're all privileged to be American. I've been what I would consider lucky to not have to experience a lot of the stuff that you guys have, and that's because of who I was born to, the color of my skin, where I grew up, whatever it is. Nobody's ever said, oh, you didn't earn this, you didn't earn that. Like, but people that grew up like me grew up a lot easier than all of you have, So I want to say to them, like, don't just immediately jump on the defensive when you hear something like that. Just try to understand where it's coming from, and I have very good talks with Elliot about this, and my friend Brahman, he's married to a blonde lady from Iowa, and they live in California now, and they've experienced some horrible racism and stuff that's happened to him throughout his life. But he gets on the angry side, to where I'm on his side. I'm trying to have these talks, and then I can feel the resentment back, and it makes me be like, man, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. So I think having these talks where nobody's on the defensive, and if you start to feel that, like, take a step back and ask yourself why are you defensive about this? Black lives matter. Nobody said your life didn't matter. Nobody, I don't know. I just feel like there's no need to be defensive in all this if you're an open-minded person. And I think the hardcore racists of the world are becoming the minority, but it's still out there. And it's going to take people like me that didn't grow up experiencing that or have those thoughts to talk about it to change it. So that's
I agree that it's definitely going to take white people to change it because we've been screaming it forever, right? Like, Black people have been screaming it forever. So it's going to be white people that are going to have to scream it. Tobias, go ahead. You're going to have to unmute. There we go. At least you got back on mute.
I really think Lester, is that right?
Leicester
is saying is so true. I think of luck and privilege. And when I think about that, every time I go out the front door, I have to put my mask on, or I have to be prepared for what is going to hit me when I get out there in the world. And it's not a choice for me. I have to deal with that no matter what. So to me, it's not about luck. Luck would assume that some of us would get burdened with that and some of us would not. Black people don't have a choice. So to me, it is a privilege to be able to go out the front door and make a mistake, we have all the issues that you have, except we have the additional burden of being Black. And it's not a choice. It's something we have to learn how to deal with. We have to learn how to deal with the anger because it's going to keep coming up. I went to a Black college from '69, the height of the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers. Our school was closed, shut down, and we were on a Black campus, burning buildings, sent home, no graduation. And I think many of us that went through that thought we won't ever have to deal with this again. And it just keeps happening over and over. I dealt with it in elementary school, in high school, in college. My first kid, I'm going to school trying to fight for him. And, here we are now with the same kind of seeing, things happen to Black men on TV, everybody standing around doing nothing, which to me is the same when I was in high school. The people that could have, I forgot, one of you said that you looked into your friend's face and you thought it was a friendly face, but it wasn't. And I think those are the same issues that I dealt with in elementary school or in high school, when you looked at a face and you thought that was someone that would give you refuge. And instead it was someone who threw a spitball or spit at you or, did something. And that kind of treatment, it just doesn't go away on its own. And we, I think, have had to learn how to deal with those little indignities throughout our lives. And to me, it's just blowing up right now. People are saying, I can't deal with it anymore. Enough is enough.
So we're gonna wrap this up.
And then
go
ahead.
And what I'm gonna ask, I'm gonna tell us. So I'm reading this book. It's called Leadership in Turbulent Times. And it was talking about the story of Abraham Lincoln, because it goes over 4 presidents. It goes over Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, and LBJ. And this isn't really a story about Lincoln, but I have to set it up with Lincoln. He was running for a re-election in '64, and the South and the North were already segregated. And the Civil War was already happening, just for some historical background. And where they were at the time was there was 2 people running for president. Was Lincoln, who was an emancipation for emancipation, the freeing of the slaves. We won't get into why or anything like that, but his stance was emancipation. And the person that he was running against was a guy named George McClellan, who was for ending the Civil War, bringing the Union back, and then dealing with the slavery issue afterwards. And what they thought, what McClellan was ready for, was for 2/3 of the Union soldiers to vote for him, because they were the ones suffering the war, right? They were the ones dying. They were the ones sleeping outside. They were the ones, whose lives were greatly being affected by the war. So it made sense that they would vote for George McClellan. That wasn't what happened. What happened was, at a 70% rate, they voted for Abraham Lincoln. And the only real differences between the two guys was this emancipation piece, right? Should the slaves be freed? So all of those soldiers, all 70% of those soldiers, voted against their self-interests. It was not in their self-interest to vote Abraham Lincoln, because if they voted McClellan, the war would end. They would go home, see their wives, see their children, see all of their families sleep in their own beds. It would be done. They chose to suffer more, right? They chose to suffer more. So some of us, some of us that have whatever you want, privilege, whatever it is you have, it's time to maybe vote against, maybe move against. I won't even say vote. Maybe do some things that are not necessarily in your personal self-interest, so the collective whole of a self-interest can rise. I think that's where we have to. That's what we're going to ask for, right? That's all that we have, that we really want with the whole Black Lives Matter, white privilege, whatever, all of it. Look outside of yourselves. Look outside. Man, I'm privileged as hell. I won't say that I'm not. I have two parents that love me, give me everything they could possibly give. They stay together. They're still together. Like, if you want to look at my dad, he's in Hawaii right now. Yeah, I'm privileged. God damn right I'm privileged. He's stuck in Hawaii because of quarantine. Stuck. I won't let him go home. We argue about it all the time. Like, no, just stay there. There's no corona in Hawaii. So man, maybe I have to put my neck out on the line a little bit. I have to put my neck on the line for the people whose necks, who can't scream for themselves. So man, I think we all can do it. I think we all can do it. And I think that's all that's really being asked right now is that. I know Tyrone is really big on the legal end of this, and we're not going to talk about voting for Trump or voting for Biden or voting for whoever the hell it is. Like, we're not going to go there yet. We're not going there, but because this is solved at a local issue, right, Tyrone? This starts locally, right? Where in your own town, how your school is run, who's on your school board, right? Who's in your policing, who the sheriff is, and things like that, right? Like, that's where we can really start to make some change in people's lives.
That's where we're seeing the change. It's at the local level, right?
Right.
It's not what's happening in the national election. It's, yes, who's on your city council, who's on your school board. Colorado just passed sweeping police reform, and it's a representative who's a local representative from my little district, right? I'm getting ready to head down to the Springs in an hour here, who spearheaded that and moved it through. So these are issues. If you stay in tuned, if you stay engaged, there will be ways for you to help. There will be ways for you to pitch in. It's not something that's insurmountable.
And I think you told, hold on, Dad. And what you told me, right, was this failed in September, right? Like, the policing change or whenever it was failed to pass in September. What's that?
February.
February. Okay.
This last session, literally like months ago.
So it failed then. They made it more strict now, like tighter rules, and it passed sweepingly, 53-13 on a local level.
Support across the board.
Across the board, bipartisan support. So we're no politics. That's not a political issue. It's a all people equal issue. Go ahead, Dad. You want to say something quickly before we get out? Jordan, he's going to need help. Go ahead, Dad.
Right. Okay. Back to you, the technologically challenged person. Well, but given what everyone has said, the laws changed. We can go back to when those things started to change, but the change has to be within. I think each of us as an individual, whatever side we fall on, we got to look in our mirror and say, what is it that this is all about? Our humanity is at stake here. The friends we have, the associates we have, where we work. We have to make that decision, what side of the line that we need to fall on. And we have to look in our mirrors. And this is how I feel personally and how I've tried to live my life, as well as communicate this to my children and family. We have to make that decision about ourselves and what kind of a person, as my son says on his shirt, be a good person. You have to make that decision in my worldview. And we have to keep this conversation going. This is a start. There are a lot of starts, and let's keep creating these starts and these conversations with people, friends, family, work, associates, whatever. They need to happen, and sometimes they can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I wore the shirt for a reason, because I think our friend Leister, Leister knows him, Lavelle knows him. I think Tyrone, were you at Muscle Farm at all when he was around? Yeah, our friend was shot, Yeah. And we can't say that we don't know if it was outright racism yet, right, Leister? I think we talked about it, but I think you said to me, how could it not be? Like if you were walking your dog and that would have happened, like, yeah. What's that?
It's surprising to me that it's hasn't been talked about with everything going on. How is that not a blatant hate crime that this guy's being charged with? I don't. It's frustrating.
So his name is Darian Simpson. I'm sorry, Darian Simon. So if there's a GoFundMe. He was shot and his girlfriend was murdered. So just walking their dog. What's that, Leister?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Walking their dog.
Walking their dog. The guy didn't like where their dog went to the bathroom, and there it was. So so if we think it's not a problem, I think we've all shown examples of how it is actually a problem. So guys, I want to thank everyone on the panel who took their time out. I know my dad and Miss Glover, you guys have been fighting this fight for, I don't know how old you are, Mr. Glover, but I'm just going to average 70, for 70 years now, for 70 years. And the rest of us, the other 5 of us, is it 4 or 5? Yeah, it's 4. Sorry, I got hit in the head today. 5. So it's our turn to kind of pick up the torch, it's our turn to kind of pick up the torch, let these guys rest a little bit, maybe, and keep moving. No rest. You both shook your head. No rest. And move forward. So I thank everyone. I thank everyone for watching. I hope there was no blaming, there was no shaming, there was no hate you. There was no you're a racist, you're not a racist. There was none of that. I hope that my goal was for it to come off in that manner. I think the panel did a great job, everyone on it, and just some perspective, guys, just some perspective of some people's lives, not just from 50 years ago, which really isn't that long ago, but Lavelle, how old are you? You're not even 30 yet, right?
I'll be 30 in a couple months.
Yeah, easy. So you're not 30 yet.
Yeah,
right?
30, baby.
30. So, somebody who's not even 30 years old, and it's still that way for him. So if we want to say it's gone and dead, I think we'll disagree. We got to do some work, everyone. So that's it, guys. Thank you all very much. Thanks everybody on the panel. I hope everyone stays happy, stays healthy, and we get out there and we get some work done.
You cut me a couple stories short, but to be continued.
To be continued. Sorry, a couple stories short. All right, guys. I'm going to take off. My family just got home. I haven't seen them all day. Thank you all so much. I appreciate everybody. I hope this was a start. I hope this was a start, and we'll keep it marching. So, thank you.
Thanks for
Tobias, nice to meet Tobias. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming to do it.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye.
You guys.